NeoCon, in partnership with AEC Daily, would like to welcome you to the NeoCon 2022 Virtual CEU presentation of Designing to Encourage Engagement and Beat Burnout, presented by Sally Augustine and Christina Maslach. This presentation qualifies for 1 AIA Learning Unit and 0.1 IDCEC Continuing Education Units. In order to receive a certificate and credit, you will need to attend for the full duration of the presentation. Within 3 business days of the session being completed, you will receive an email from AEC Daily with a link to access your certificate. Your AIA credit will be reported to AIA within 7 business days, and you can self-report your credit to IDCEC. During the presentation, if you have any questions, please submit them through the questions box, and they will be addressed at the end of today's presentation. Thank you all for attending, and we hope you enjoy the presentation. Take it away, Sally.
Hi there, this is Sally Augustine, and Christina and I would like to thank you for joining us today. Today, our focus is going to be on better understanding burnout and also how workplace design might potentially make it less likely. So first today, you'll hear from Dr. Christina Maslach. Dr. Maslach is an emerita professor at Berkeley and the authority worldwide on burnout. She's the author of the Maslach Burnout Inventory, which is the most respected tool for measuring burnout. And Dr. Maslach and I are both affiliated with the Interdisciplinary Center for Healthy Workplaces at Berkeley. After Dr. Maslach fills us in on burnout, I'll speak for a few minutes about how workplace design can help reduce the possibility of burnout, and then we'll field questions. Dr. Maslach, if you'd like to begin.
Great. Thank you, Sally. And thank you all for inviting us to give a presentation this morning. And I hope you'll find it useful and interesting and provide some new insights. So if we could start with the next slide. I want to begin with the World Health Organization's statement on burnout, which came out in 2019. And it's also the year of COVID-19 that the World Health Organization recognized. But they were, with burnout, it wasn't something new. It was something that they had reviewed over 40 years worth of research globally on job burnout and had sort of put together a statement. So you can see the first part of that in the next slide, or next, yeah, there we go. That burnout is a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. Let me point out a few things about that first sentence. It's a syndrome, it's a stress response, okay? So it shares a lot with just, it is the human stress response that all of us have. And responding to, here's an important aspect of it, chronic workplace stressors. The fact that they are chronic means that they are not occasional, they are not once in a while, they are not something, what we call acute stress. Chronic stress means it's high frequency. It's there most of the time, if not all of the time. So it has that, the chronic stressors have much more wear and tear on us than acute stressors do, because they just kind of wear away at you over time. So that chronic stressors that this is a response to is important. The second point I want to make here is that it says that has not been successfully managed. So there's optimism here. World Health is saying it could be successfully managed. It doesn't have to happen this way. The response could be lessened, reduced, made less likely and less powerful and so forth. So there is a statement here that is really saying this is something that can be changed. It didn't say how and by whom and by what and so forth, and we'll get into that later. But the response, the stress response to these chronic workplace stressors of burnout is characterized by 3 dimensions. Next. So exhaustion, energy depletion, so tired, overwhelmed, he can't do another thing. This is the basic stress response. And so it's not different in that way. But what's different about burnout is that there are 2 other things that end up going on. And that is how you feel and handle your job and how you feel and handle yourself. So the second thing there is this distancing, pulling back, feeling very negative, feeling highly cynical about the work and the workplace, and, take this job and shove it kind of attitude. And this will have important consequences for one's performance, how well one does the job. Because what we find is that when people develop this highly negative cynicism about the job in burnout, they are not trying to do their very best. They are trying to do the bare minimum. So their behavior changes, their productivity, their attention to detail, correcting errors, all of those kind of things become more problematic rather than, really as good as they could be. And then finally, there is also a negative sense of one's own effectiveness as a whatever occupational group you're in at that point. Why am I here? Maybe I'm not really good at this. Maybe it was a mistake to be doing this. I'm not proud of how I'm working on this, et cetera, et cetera. So that trifecta of the exhaustion of stress response, the cynicism about the environment and the work, the job, and a really negative attitude about oneself in terms of professional efficacy. That's what we really mean by burnout, and it's really all of those that we need to look at. Next. World Health Organization went to great lengths to point out that they were categorizing job burnout as an occupational phenomenon. Next. And not, and this is World Health now, not classifying it as a medical condition. And I want to emphasize that because the predominant response out there from a lot of people and a lot of workplaces and whatever is, oh my gosh, it's a personal problem. What's wrong with you? You're burned out. How do we help the people? Why do we cure the people? What are your symptoms? All of this kind of thing. It is not a medical condition. It may have health consequences, in terms of changes to your body. We know all stress responses come along with that. It can come along with other mental health issues, but is not in and of itself classified as some sort of disease. And this is going to be important as we go on through this. Next. What we do know about unhealthy workplaces is something that is not new. Chronic job stressors produce a lot of bad things going on in workplaces. And these are things that we have known about and have tried to, sound the alarm about for a long, long time. So it didn't come along with COVID and all the rest of it. We've known this. So there are all kinds of job conditions that are highly stressful and they're toxic in the sense of having negative impact. And I've listed just a couple. But there's many more. Long hours, high demands, insecurity, lack of control, no support, conflict with the rest of your life. And what we find is that these conditions are just not, it's just not that they're bothersome and stressful, they actually have a danger for and pose a threat to people's health, their well-being, their enjoyment of life, their productivity. You'll see absenteeism go up, healthcare costs go up. As I said before, more errors and difficulty in doing the job well, lower expectancy in working years, burnout, depression, etc. So we should care a lot about doing something about and managing more successfully these chronic job stressors. Next. So here's one message I want to make sure you leave with. What we should be doing is fixing the job, not just trying to fix the person. It's both. It's not an either or kind of thing. Next. But this is the common response that I was mentioning. The common response that everybody's kind of doing out there is, how do we help the workers cope, with these stressors? Be more mindful, meditate, take time off, take a vacation. All of these kind of things is how to, help people if they experience burnout. Next. But it turns out that those decades of burnout research are pointing to something real different. You've got to be able to modify successfully the sources of the stress, not simply how do people cope with the stressors. And so it's the relationship between the job and the person, and you've got to look at both together in terms of making a difference. Now, in this past few years, the world has changed dramatically with the COVID, pandemic. And given all those current changes, there are, we have to think of this. We had to do new things. People couldn't come to the workplace that was more healthy than ever. They had to stay at home. Others didn't have that luxury. They had under conditions to do their work. So we need to be new ways of better ways of creating and maintaining healthy environments in which people thrive and are not beaten down. So fixing the job has to be part of this, and not just what do we do about these people. Next. Another take home is this right here. From the research, we have found that this mismatch, this misfit, this imbalance between the job and the person can happen in many ways. But we've been able to identify at least 6 of those areas which are predictive of, greater risk of burnout down the road if there's mismatches. On the other hand, if there's a better match, you have a greater probability of engagement with work. So let me just put out these 6 areas. The next, this is the first one that everybody thinks of, too much work to do. With work overload, the mismatch is high demands, low resources. You don't have enough time, you don't have enough tools, you don't have the right people, all of those kind of things to get the job done and meet the demands in a good way and on time. So the mismatch there is clearly leading to greater exhaustion and stress. The next. But there's often when people talk about too much to do, they're often talking about uncontrollable workload. That means you don't have as much say, choice, discretion, ability to figure out new solutions or ad lib when some new things have arisen that you hadn't anticipated. So the control that you have over the kind of work you do and how to make it the best possible or save, effort or money or all of those kind of things. If you don't have that, people feel it's not just the overload, it's the lack of control. Next. Insufficient reward. We're talking about the positive feedback that usually comes when you do something well. It could be, monetary in terms of salary or benefits, but the research is showing that it is also really, really important that you are getting social recognition for the kinds of things you do, that people notice, pat you on the back, say thank you, I'm glad you were here, whew, you really saved us on that one. I could learn from you. Could you give me advice? All of these kind of things that indicate that what you have done has been good, has been recognized, and is being rewarded in some way. Next. Breakdown of community, and by this I mean the workplace community. Who are all the people whose paths you cross on a regular basis or somewhat regular basis? Co-workers, bosses, people you supervise, the public, customers, clients, etc. When there's a breakdown of that social community, and I'm saying that instead of network now, given the change in that meaning, what it means is that there's a lack of support. You don't know who to trust. It's hard to know who you could turn to if you had a question. You have a culture of fear where you don't want to expose, oh my gosh, I don't know the answer, or I'm having trouble, or I need some assistance or something like that, or I just need a shoulder to cry on. Instead, you're facing a place where there is a lot of incivility, put downs, bullying, this culture of fear, who's trying to throw you under the bus. Where do you go for help, reward, all this kind of thing. We've been seeing this breakdown of community happening for years now, even before the pandemic. People often talk about it's a socially toxic workplace. I mean, I enjoy what I do, but I wish I could do it somewhere else and not with this group. And for many people, they actually had an opportunity to do it not within the community in person in other ways. And so that's been an interesting sort of shift and change, comes with its own challenges as well as rewards. The next area, absence of fairness. This has to do with whatever the rules are, whatever the policy is, whatever the practices are that we have here in this workplace, is that they are fairly applied and fairly followed in terms of who gets rewarded, who gets new opportunities, who gets various chances. When there is an absence of fairness, that people are cheating and lying to get ahead, that people are not being recognized fairly for what they have done, the cynicism really begins to skyrocket. This is where glass ceilings exist. This is where discrimination lives. And you're working in an environment that is can be very, very negative and unsupportive. And finally, the sixth area has to do with value conflicts. What this means is that people find themselves in situations where they are caught between conflicting values. I can't do X and Y, both. What do I do? Or there's real ethical conflicts. You're being asked to do something you consider to be wrong or illegal, or not speak up and stay silent rather than seeing something that's going on that should be reported. There are many ways in which these value conflicts can arise, and they can in some cases be so bad that even if everything else is fine on those other 5 areas, the value conflict may lead people to say, I've had it, I can't work here anymore, I've got to be out of here. It's eating away at my soul. So these 6 areas are things to keep in mind, and I'll show you how to work with them positively in just a minute. But the bottom line here is next, the more there are mismatches between people and the job, the more the risk of burnout that we're going to have. Next. So one other thing I want to share with you is that burnout and its opposite of engagement are not the only 2 profiles or experiences that people can have on the job. There are at least 5 major ones that we see in the research, and theoretically we could see even more than that. But these are the big 5 that tend to pop up when we assess people across a wide number of people in a particular profession. So burnout, as I mentioned before, is that there are 3 high-frequency negative scores. You're feeling highly exhausted, highly cynical, and feeling very ineffective in terms of your work. All of those together are burnout. But there are some, and then with engagement, you're not seeing that. It's not to say that you don't sometimes feel exhausted or feel cynical or whatever, but it's rare. It's not as often, maybe once a month, a couple of times a year, whatever. Basically, you're not seeing the high frequency. So in that sense, all 3 are positive. And there are 3 in between where there's 1 high negative score. Disengaged is the people who are high on cynicism. And as you'll see in a minute, I think cynicism is more the hallmark of burnout, not the exhaustion of stress. But there is a group that is only exhausted, still feeling good about the job, still feeling good about themselves, though. And we call those overextended. And then there's also people who are feeling not good about themselves and their work and their effectiveness, but still like the job and aren't stressed out and overworked. So let's move to the next. And this is just to give you, this is pre-pandemic, by the way. Things have changed a bit since then, but this is for healthcare workers throughout North America, a sample that I did with my coworker, Michael Leiter. And you can see on the sort of upper left that about of all of those, that entire sample, about 15% were scoring as burned out. And if you look to the upper right, about twice that amount are reporting engaged. And that 29, 30% tends to be the typical engagement chunk. And that is found by Gallup and others who do engagement surveys in different organizations, around 30%. Sometimes it doesn't change a lot, but it's around 30%. And we see the same thing here. So burnout is not the dominant one by a long shot. Next to burnout on the far left, is what you were seeing as the disengaged group, about 20, and you're seeing down below the overextended around 17 and ineffective 20. So, this is what I'm saying is that in any large workplace or organization or occupational group, you'll see a mix of all of these. So now, next. I'm showing you the same healthcare workers on the areas of work life, plus an extra one that we threw in at their request on administration. And what you're seeing is on the far right, this is the burned out group, that 15%. And they're all being compared to a norm, a baseline of healthcare workers. And the burned out group is everything is worse than the average, than the norm. And particularly such things as reward and values and, the control they have over their kind of work, that sort of thing. The opposite engagement on the far left, you can see compared to the baseline norm, they're doing pretty well in all of those areas. Things are better than average in some sense. So those are the two opposites. But look at how the match or the mismatches play out for the other three areas, or profiles, excuse me. And if you look at the middle one, that's the overextended group that I mentioned before. They are the ones who are experiencing high exhaustion. They are tired, worn out, can't get up in the morning to deal with all of this kind of thing. They don't look out. And what they have is one big issue, overwhelming issue is workload, a huge issue. Other than that, they're kind of average, some a little better, some a little not, but it's all about the workload. If you look at burnout, it's way more than that. So overextended and just being highly exhausted alone and still feeling good about yourself and the job is not the same as the experience of the burned out group. The one that is looking more like the burned out group are the disengaged, meaning the high cynicism group. They don't have a workload issue, but everything else about what's going on in the job is causing issues and problems for them. They don't see it positively. And if you look over to the left to the ineffective profile, which, by the way, tends to get understudied in research because people often want to shorten this survey and so they don't look at personal efficacy, which is a little bit of surprise to me. It's important. And what you're finding there is that, workload is not the issue, but everything else is about the norm, average. But you know what? Compared to engagement, it could be better. So interventions that might, kind of help people move to a more positive place might not all look the same for all of these different kinds of groups. And what you're going to need for people experiencing burnout is not the same for people who are feeling ineffective. Next. So when we have these mismatches, how can we create a better match between the job conditions in the situation and the people who are working there? Next. And basically what we're talking about is modifying the work conditions that create negative outcomes. And what Sally and I, and Sally will talk more about, is how do we use environmental psychology? How do we use the model of ergonomics, which traditionally has focused on the relationship between workers and their physical environment? So we've learned how we can design better chairs, better workstations, how we can design better airline cockpits so that people, make fewer mistakes and the body is not stressed out when they're sitting for a long time, all that kind of thing. We're matching the job conditions to what human beings are like. Next. And what our argument is we want to apply that same design model not just to the physical environment, but to the social, the psychological environment. In other words, all the things that make people tick, that motivate them, that get them doing their best, taking pride in their work, all of that kind of thing. So we want to design matches in the same way. Next. And when I talk about a match, when we're talking about social and psychological match, we're talking about core social and psychological needs that all of us have as just basic human beings. And these have been studied for many, many, many years. And so there's at least, these core 7 here. And what it means is you take into account what are the things that kind of support and boost one's sense of autonomy, one's sense of control, one's sense of ability to take care of things and solve problems. All of us want to feel that we can do that. And whether it's at work or at home or in our lives elsewhere, the same social psychological needs are important. We're talking just about the workplace in this case, but they are more universal than that. What makes us feel that we belong, that we are part of something bigger, that we are playing a role and contributing? What are the sort of things that help build a sense of competence? I know what I'm doing, I can do it well, and I strive to do my best. More recently, there's been a focus on psychological safety, not just physical safety, but psychological. Can I raise my voice, point out questions, raise criticisms, etc., and I won't get dumped on, I won't get harassed, I'm not going to get discriminated against. So that psychological safety is a very important need. Fairness, I've already talked about that as one of the key things that we see with burnout, that the world is a basically fair place. And if you do X, you're likely to be, get an outcome of Y. Meaning, this means purpose, the goals. Why am I here? What am I doing? What am I taking pride in as I make a contribution? And finally, positive emotions. We all want to be able to live a life where we have things that we are fun or satisfying, that make us laugh, that make us feel good, that we take pride in. And what are the sort of things that help that occur on a more regular basis in the workplace as well as elsewhere? Next. So, 6 paths to a healthy workplace. Take the 6 areas that I just talked about before and was talking about the mismatches. What we do is we pivot and switch to what would be a more positive match in each of these 6 areas, or at least the ones that seem to be problematic. Next. So there's different ways of thinking about what these are. So here's my take on it. Instead of overload and you can't manage the workload, a sustainable workload. So that if you're working really hard at some point, it's matched with times off or times to recover so that you can keep going and do it well. Next, having some appropriate level of choice and control over what you do and how you can make the job as good as possible and the work you do well. Next, okay, when it comes to reward, how do we build in better, meaningful recognition and reward for when things go well? Next, how do we build a more supportive work community where people feel we each have our back? We support each other. We figure out solutions to problems where we disagree. We're on the same page in terms of what we're trying to accomplish. And we, do things for each other to support us being successful. Next, it's a fair place to work. There's respect for people, basic social justice in terms of what we're doing and who's doing it. And finally, next, that the values are clear and that the work is meaningful. It's not just about slogans on the wall, but clearly the way we operate and what we do. Like, this is a place I want to be in and be a part of. So the burnout challenge really is not to say, oh gosh, what are we going to do about these sick people? It's more about saying these 6 areas all have a way of making an unhealthy workplace, but we can pivot to the challenge of building a healthier one. And these are 6 starting points. Some of them, as you look at a particular workplace, it may not be a workload issue. We often find people think, oh, people are working too hard, they're not getting paid enough. And it'll turn out that when you do the assessment, they're more concerned about the community supportiveness or the fairness, those kinds of things. So where do we begin? How do we improve? Next. So for me, what I have discovered with all of these years of research is that there's a lot of options, many possibilities. This is the optimistic part, that World Health is talking about. You can figure out many ways to make a better match between people and their job conditions. There's not one size fits all. There are many kinds of possibilities. It'll be different for people doing some kind of work than people doing other kind of work. And these changes don't have to be big and expensive and, one size fits all. They can be small. You can do many of them. They can sometimes not cost anything. And the important thing is that they're customizable. You make it fit with who we are and what we're doing. And what we find is that this healthier job environment, by looking at both the job and the people, the workers and the workplace, it takes care of both of them so that former will thrive and the latter will succeed. And next is turning it over to Sally to say, okay, let's take this workplace design and how does it make a difference and how could it make a positive difference in meeting that burnout challenge. So Sally, all yours.
Well, thank you, Christina. And now that we're all on the same page about burnout, I'll be talking briefly about how workplace design can make a difference regarding burnout. And just right off the bat, it's important to be clear that, design is not magic. Painting walls a particular color or adding more storage, won't eliminate the detrimental effects of, say like a tyrannical boss who calls their direct reports in the middle of the night to make new demands, for example. But in some cases, it is likely that design can have a positive effect regarding, reducing burnout. And can we go on? Next slide. Workplace design can potentially influence burnout in four major ways. It can do this, and this list harkens back to like the mismatches and things that Christina's been talking about. But workplace design can potentially influence burnout through its effects on sustainable workload, choice and control, messages sent regarding reward, fairness, and value, and also its effects on community. And could we go on to the next slide, please? So first, we'll talk briefly about sustainable workload. And here I'm really talking about making it more likely that people can do their work, whatever they've been asked to do or, taken upon themselves to do, and to do it well. And supporting people as they do their jobs, helping them to work to their full potential and have pleasant lives while they do so, has been extensively researched and reported in multiple prior talks here that I've given and that other people have given here, and talks that I've given, other people have given in a number of other venues as well. So I'll just quickly run through some of the things I'm thinking of when I'm talking about how design can create a more sustainable workload. Something that's top of mind with people now is ventilation. It's really clear that enhanced building ventilation has positive effects on people's performance, organizational performance, as well as well-being. So, people will be therefore more likely to be able to successfully do the work that they're being asked to do in an appropriately ventilated environment. You've probably heard about the research indicating that seeing the color red, even briefly, degrades analytical performance. So if people are going to be doing analytical tasks, when we're thinking about a sustainable workload, get the red out. Seeing green, the color green, has been shown to enhance creative performance. So if somebody is trying to write an advertising slogan or something like that, they'll be apt to work more effectively if an environment has green elements. Natural light, we all learned is almost a magic elixir for humans. When humans are in a naturally lit space, they work particularly well. And also regarding light, we've learned things like warmer light is greater for creativity type tasks and for relaxing. Cooler light for concentration and alertness, so you can tune the light to the task, which makes achieving work objectives more likely. plants, wood grain, and biophilic design generally. Being able to see wood grain, being able to see plants, and biophilic design boosts performance. Also, seeing clutter, just visual clutter is terrible for people accomplishing their tasks. And there's also work directly linking visual clutter and feeling burned out. And then there are some things that you may not have heard about before that can really enhance performance and goal achievement. Things like smelling the scent of lemon really helps us with our professional performance. But after we've done all this, difficult mental work, we do need to mentally refresh. And in order for our workload to be sustainable, we have to be able to enter spaces where we can cognitively revitalize ourselves. This happens with particular sorts of views, both within workspaces and to outdoors. If you're at NeoCon now and you're in the mart, you can look out and see green roofs. Seeing that kind of green roof can be great for mental refreshment. So can art, particular sorts of art, plants, natural soundscapes. There's many ways that we can mentally refresh. If we go on to the next slide. Physical environments can also provide people with choice and control. And when people have a comfortable level of control, not only does their performance improve, their mental well-being improves. And research has directly linked lower levels of burnout to having choices as to where to work, as people do in activity-based workplaces where there are zones in an on a floor plan, for example, some for concentrated work, some for collaboration, etc. Also, you can provide choice and control by supplying options as to how work gets done, such as the ability to change some ambient conditions like lighting. And there's a great deal of research linking lighting control and things like that to less exhaustion, all through the mechanism of control and the psychological boost people get to that. Obviously, burnout is more than just exhaustion, but it is an interesting field of study. Can we go on to the next slide? Messages sent regarding reward, fairness, and values also can be ways that the physical environment makes burnout less likely. So, first, regarding rewards, you do have to provide them as appropriate and as is fair, as Christina was talking about. And design related elements can be rewards in different situations. So, design related rewards, particularly things that relate to changes in the physical environment, can be particularly powerful because people in groups, users of spaces, feel that the way the physical environment is used is a truer representation of an organization's, management's philosophy than any sort of value statements, etc., which they issue. So it's basically like putting money where your mouth is. Via, in this case, particularly, we're talking about rewards in the physical environment. Also when we're thinking about messages sent in burnout, a space can convey fairness and values non-verbally and via all sorts of different ways, depending on the message that needs to be communicated. For example, you can do this via material use or art selection, art in use, for example. And can we go on to the next slide? Building community via design is often discussed at NeoCon, and it can go very well beyond creating a draw, such as a break room with good coffee. There's all sorts of things you can do that are much more sophisticated. For example, when two people are having a conversation and their seats are at right angles to each other, think about the edge along the front of the seat. If those edges are at right angles to each other, people are much more likely to form a positive relationship with each other. Actually, that seems it's because they can easily break eye contact when and if they need to. So, that creates an atmosphere that leads to a more positive relationship ultimately forming. Another thing you could think of, just a couple more examples before we go on to the questions. When people are talking in a group, it's really important that they're all either sitting on seats whose legs are about the same length, or they're all sitting on the floor. Because if people are sitting at different heights, say somebody is sitting at the height of a conventional desk chair, say, and someone else is at the height of a bar stool. Well, all that looking up and down at each other changes how we interact with each other. People who are looked up to are seen as more powerful and experienced, basically more adult-like. People who are looked down on because they're on the lower seat, or you can also think of like stadium bleachers here. People who are looked down at are seen as less powerful and experienced. This screws up conversations, has a big effect on them, and that can have a unpleasant effect on community formation. It won't surprise you to learn that when people are sitting on cushioned seats, even if there's a slight cushion, they get along better with each other than they do if they're sitting on hard surfaces. That would be like a wooden seat without a cushion, like a church pew. So just the tiniest little cushion helps people get along better with each other. When people are looking at someone and there's a warm colored background behind the person that they're speaking with, that other person seems warmer and friendlier. This can be great for community development. I was talking about lighting and earlier, when warmer or dimmer light, we communicate more positively with others. I mean, and there's even research showing things like when we smell lavender, the scent of lavender, we're more apt to trust each other. So just in conclusion, before we go on to the questions, I want to just sum up by reiterating that design can potentially influence burnout levels in a group by its effects on sustainable workloads, choice and control, messages sent regarding reward, fairness and values, and its effects on work community. Now, could we go on to the next slide? We had, the time that we had today together, and Christina and I are glad we had this opportunity to talk with you, but, obviously we couldn't fully address all the topics that we'd like to, and Christina and Michael Leiter have a book that's going to be coming out in the really near future that provides further detail on the materials that she was discussing. And now I want to open things up for questions, and that I can. First, I wanted to ask Christina, what's the thing that people get wrong most often about burnout?
Oh, interesting question. I sort of alluded to it, but didn't really
Yes.
discuss it. And that is that people think it's some sort of a personal weakness or incompetence or illness or disease, and how are you going to treat people? And And, you know, we're going to send you off to a therapist, we're going to send you off to a doctor, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And the solutions that come when you focus on saying, oh, a burnout is an individual weakness or disease, means that you're asking a who question and you're going to come up with who answers, which may not really actually be addressing what the problem is. And so we're seeing a huge self-care industry out there, which is trying to help people cope with the kind of stress response that burnout is. But that's not doing anything about preventing the stressors from having that kind of impact. Let's not, you
Right,
know, what do we do when we have the problem, but what about trying to reduce the problem in the first place? So I
right.
think, you know, along with what World Health is saying, is really emphasizing that you've got to look, it's not that we don't want to help people cope, of course, you know, but that's not the answer. More of the answer has to be tied into that relationship with the job conditions.
Got it. Now, we have a question from Melissa in the audience, and she asks, is there one particular type of occupation or industry that suffers from the highest burnout?
Interesting question, and there hasn't really been the kind of, you'd have to do massive epidemiological kind of research to say, oh, across all teachers or doctors or, you know, analysts or tech, whatever. And we don't have that. We have, you know, smaller studies of different groups. But what I can say is that over the years, over those 40 years, healthcare has certainly been always in the burnout domain. They've been the ones who've been talking about it earliest and doing things about it and trying to cope with it. So that's true. Teachers, educators have been talking about it early on. And when you think about just those two groups, they got hit really, really hard during the pandemic, and it made things even worse. They are in some sense, and certainly with healthcare, but also other kinds of what we call now first responders. You know, it could be police, it could be health, you know, social workers, it could be all kinds of, you know, people, you know, therapists and so forth. They had to work under extraordinary kind of conditions during the pandemic. And I talked to a lot of people in those jobs who just said, I've experienced burnout before, but never as bad as this. We're seeing among teachers, they got thrown into the deep end of the pool, many of them,
Right.
meaning that suddenly, without warning, without preparation, without any good guidance as to how do you teach when you're not in person with your students, you know, had to invent, had to cope with, you know, erratic technology and not really sure this is the right way to do things and whatever. Very, very difficult, although they were not on site the way, say, healthcare had to be. So those are certainly a lot. We have been hearing in recent years from a lot of tech work, and that can be broadly defined, just saying this is out of control. This is, you know, awful. They've been worried about what is happening to people. How do you, in some kinds of areas of tech work like cybersecurity, they are so understaffed globally around the world in this that it is, I mean, it's a huge, huge problem. People don't stay. Even if they take a job, oh my God, I can't do that, you know, and they'll leave. So there are different issues that kind of face different occupations, but those are some of the ones that right now I would say are sort of top of the list or have had a longer history of that. And
Got it.
quite frankly, just to add a last point,
Sure.
I am really worried about the number of people who are quitting and leaving and saying, I'm not going back into that same healthcare job. I'm not going back to teach in that school. You know, where are the replacements? How are we going to attract more people? Because we need teachers, we need doctors and nurses and people in healthcare. And we've got a future problem coming up.
And then Tiffany asked a question to me. She asks, can you please provide examples of designing rewards in the physical environment? And I'd be happy to talk about rewards in the physical environment. And I think when you're considering rewards in the physical environment, you always have to do that in the context of the user's organizational culture and national culture, because you need to be thinking of something that would be both valued and appropriate for a particular group. And if we think of Cameron and Quinn's set of organizational cultures, just to begin, there are clans where people tend to be, say, more interested in collaboration or collegial situations. There's hierarchies where control is more important. There's markets where competition is top of mind among people, and then there are adhocracies where there's a great deal of drive to create. So, you within those contexts, you'd have to be thinking about something that would be both, appropriate, and also consistent with national cultures. For example, some natural cultures are more individualistic versus collectivistic. So, that could affect the way a reward is developed. Some cultures are more accepting of differences in allocation of resources based on power, for example. So, all these things need to come into play in a specific organization to see what a valued reward would be, and then how it should be presented, how it potentially should be shared, etc. And Tiffany also asks, if there are any suggestions for designing for multi-generational workforces as it relates to burnout. And I think when we're thinking about multi-generational workforces, we have to understand that although people may be from different generations, they're still very motivated to do their jobs well. When we create workplaces where people can concentrate when they need to, regardless of their generation, when people can collaborate effectively, regardless of generation, etc., we as a result have a work environment where, since the workload becomes that much more sustainable, burnout becomes that much less likely. And those are the questions that we've received. And just as since we have a few minutes left, I have one more question for you, Christina, and that is, how often you're hearing people attending meetings related to burnout, how often you're hearing those people talking about environmental design and its effects on burnout? Do you hear that sometimes, never? What's the scoop?
What's the scoop on that? One of the things that I do is always ask people to let me know things that they've tried and that have worked, that have been
good.
successful. Yeah. Or also, because we learn from the things that don't work, why, you tried something and you had good ideas and whatever, and what didn't work on that. And for me, it's not about environmental and personal. It's really that relationship between the two and how they've changed the relationships that go on. And it involves, in many cases, the success stories. And by the way, a number of those are put in the book that's coming out. And thank you for mentioning that. So we talk about that in more detail. But let me just give you a little example or two. There was an office and where people had, all kinds of work to do, but all kinds of other people in the department would come through and do things and talk and chat and pick up mail and da-da-da-da. And the workers, after a while, were just feeling overwhelmed. They couldn't get their job done. They had to work during their lunch hour. They were staying late. They weren't getting paid. It was just like, oh my God, we got to do something. They got, together with their supervisor and said, this is, so they did it. And now they kind of thought about it and realized the workload hadn't changed very much. really. What was happening is they were getting so disrupted and interrupted during the day that it
Oh,
was really,
interesting.
even if it was nice stuff, that they really couldn't get stuff done. So what they came up with as their solution was, we need a head start. So they decided that from 8 to 10 in the morning, the office, their departmental, main office, would be closed to nobody, to everybody except themselves. They had 2 hours quiet time just to get going and really make it. And then doors are open, people can come in, share pizza, tell a joke,
Yeah.
pick up their mail, complain about the fact that, the grant proposal hasn't been done yet, etc.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, so it was a change they made, which suited their situation, realizing that the problem was they were being too nice to other people to let them come in when they needed to do their work.
And I think
Now,
that's a great solution because it also points out that, like the physical environment
yeah,
is cool, but it doesn't like act, totally independently of the world that surrounds it, right? Like
right,
people establish ways of using a space, even sometimes rituals for how it gets used. And
that's it.
those can be as important as like where the furniture is and or all
Oh yeah,
sorts of things about the physical design. Mhm.
yeah. And then let me give you a little postscript to that, because this
Sure.
happened, several years ago. And basically what they were able to do is to shut the doors, with a sign saying,
Yep.
thank you, come back and see us, etc. They then got moved from their building, which was old and finally was going to come down and be replaced. And they were moved into a new space that had a big open thing, no doors, there were pathways back, and people walking through, not even to stop to see them or ask something, but to get somewhere else. And they completely lost their control to privacy for those opening hours
Oh, sure.
because the design did not allow for it anymore. And at some point, they even tried to put up a kind of a barrier to sort of say, please just don't come this way during the morning. And everybody got hugely upset that, what do you mean I can't walk down that path, kind of thing. I'm trying to
Yep.
get to the other corner. So it was a design that they had no part of, but once they were in it, they realized it now did the solution they had come up with before no longer worked, and they had to figure out another way of handling this. So I think
Right. Everything does have to be holistic in the end, considering
yeah,
the
yeah,
range of different social, et cetera, other factors, or it's not going to work.
yeah. And one other point, if I could just raise it
Oh,
quickly in
sure.
response to what you had said earlier about another question on this, is that what I've been seeing recently in many, several years, even before the pandemic, as well as doing it, is that often there are decisions that are made about what rewards are we going to give people? What are we going to do for our people, my people, da 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 da. The intention is great, but somebody puts in a change top down without ever getting input and collaborative feedback from the people who are going to have to live with it. And one
Oh,
of the
yeah.
worst, and when I go in and I talk to them about why they're doing this, and then I talk to the people in the building, in the organization, whatever, and they are like, you mean he spent all that money to put a volleyball court on the roof instead of fixing all these, I mean, people talk about the chronic job stressors as pebbles in your shoe. They're there all the time. They're always bothersome. They're always, it's hard to get past them. And it was like, he thought it would be a great thing. A lot of money to fix the roof, put the volleyball court, etc. Unused because people are saying that's not the issue or the
Oh, no.
problem that we needed fixed. And think of the money that could have been spent on, can I give you my list? You know,
Yeah,
so
nothing's ever going to work if you don't involve
if,
the
yeah,
people who are actually going to have to live the solution.
or to get the reward. I mean, again,
Yep.
there are things where people
Yeah.
are saying,
Mhm.
oh, you're being honored. You're going to have this great opportunity to do what? And they're kind of thinking, you know, we could do something better than that, if you really, so the the communication has to be much more bottom up, top down, sideways,
Yep.
however you want to talk about it, so that we are all on the same page and we can sort of give feedback. I cannot tell you how many people I interview around issues of burnout and say how demoralizing it is to have been well trained as an engineer or as a physician or as a whatever, and not have the ability to actually have any say or feedback or shaping to make it a better thing, or have some
Yeah.
input. Here are
Yep. Input
10 possible solutions. I don't know if maybe some of them would be better than I, but could we do something about this, please?
Right.
And so don't second guess, like even saying, oh my gosh, what do we do for another generation like the millennials? They are facing different stressors than people who've been around for a longer time. You need to find out what actually makes sense for where they are and what they're dealing with. Rather than assuming
That's
there
the
is
only
a
way we ever get.
prize, a prize, a reward out there that it one size fits all again. Everybody will love it. No, they won't. So anyway,
Well,
getting people more
unfortunately, I think that
actively
we're going to
involved.
have to wrap it up because it's
Okay.
12:00 or 1 minute after the end. But I definitely agree about if you don't talk to users, you end up with them. Or the people who live the solution, you end up with a terrible mess. And thank you, Christina, for speaking with us. And we'll do be in touch with Christina or I if you have additional questions or comments.
Yeah, well, thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. I think it was really good and fun, and I'm pleased that we were able to do this.
Well, thank you.
I'd like to extend a warm thank you to Sally and Christina for presenting today. I'd also like to thank all of the learners who have taken the time out of their day to attend this webinar. As a reminder, you can watch this session online anytime until July 15th via the NeoCon Hub. I hope you enjoyed the presentation and have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone.